I'm Marie from Humblebee and Me, and today we are making this Minty poppy seed scrubby soap. So it's got a smooth top, an indigo seam, and then a scrubby base with poppy seeds and pumice added to it, so you can really buff away at any extra dirty bits of you. It's great for feet, it's great for gardeners, it's great for mechanics. It also smells wonderfully fresh and minty. So we'll be cold processing this recipe, but we'll be doing it in a sort of non-typical manner. Usually when you cold process soap, you mix your lye water and you melt your fats and then you sort of juggle them to about the same temperature, around maybe 110 degrees Fahrenheit, before combining them. But we'll be doing something a little bit different. That's quite a bit faster and requires far less fussing, and in fact doesn't require any thermometers. You'll basically be making your lye water and using that to melt your fats, because the lye water reaction, water plus sodium hydroxide, is an exothermic or heat releasing reaction. We'll use that heat to melt our fat so we don't have to fuss with any juggling or thermometers. It's a great shortcut and fantastic if you just sort of want to mow right on through your soap making and you don't want to have to worry about putting things in the fridge or reheating anything. So today's recipe is actually the other half of my citrus summer punch swirl soap. So as you watch the video, you'll probably notice, a little peak of a sort of pinky orange soap off in the corner. And you'll notice that the first half of the process is the same as the first half of the process for the citrus summer punch swirl soap. So if you've seen that video already, you can skip forward a bit. I would like to point out that this is not a soaping safety video. I am assuming that you have some level of familiarity with soap making and with soaping safety. If you don't, I would really encourage you to go look that up now. That's knowledge that you've really got to have, and I'm not designing this to be a, from the ground up beginner video. So make sure that you know what you're doing. All right, let's go make some soap. We'll kick things off with our oils here, and you'll notice I've divided our oils into two parts. So over here in this pot, we've got our hard oils with our higher melting points. So this is a pot of shea butter and beef tallow. And over here we have our softer oils with our lower melting points. So this is coconut oil, and that's the solid bits here, and then liquid castor oil, rice bran oil, and soybean oil. So what I'm going to do, instead of melting everything together and then letting them cool together, I'm going to speed things up a bit. I'm going to pop this pot on the stove over low heat until everything has just liquefied. And then I'm going to bring it back and add these oils here, because these ones will just melt from the residual heat of these, and then we can add our lye water and keep on trucking, and it's much faster. So let's go melt these. While the oils melt, we'll get our mold ready. So this is a mold that my dad made me, and the plans for it are on my blog. I'll put a link in the description box below. All right, there we are. So I've got a divider down the middle here, and you can see I've marked the middle point so that we can divide the batch of batter we're making into two separate bars. And I've used elastic bands because parchment paper is so non-stick that even tape doesn't stick to it. So it's been about 10 minutes and our tallow and shea butter have melted through. The time that it takes to melt will obviously depend on the size of batch you're making. So now we're going to add our softer oils. Now that the coconut oil has almost completely melted, I'm just going to put this to the side and we will prepare our sodium hydroxide solution. So we have a jug of water here, and so it's important that the jug that you use is dishwasher safe, because the temperature of the lye water can actually get up to be hotter than a dishwasher, and it can melt plastic that is not dishwasher safe. So I've just got an old glass jar here. I think this was a peanut butter jar sometime in a previous life. And so you can see we've got our sodium hydroxide here and our water, and all of these things have been measured by weight, and that's really important. Absolutely no volume measurements in soap making. And if you're wondering, well, how much of everything are you using? I'm not giving you any specific amounts because I want you to be able to choose your soap batch size yourself, but everything is written out in percentages in the description box below, and you can use SoapCalc to figure out all your exact amounts of everything. If you're not sure how to use SoapCalc, I made a video to show you how. So we're going to add our sodium hydroxide to our water, not the other way around. This is not going to smell pretty, so don't inhale and make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area. I tend to sort of hold my breath and then give it a stir, walk away, get a bit of fresh air, hold my breath again, come back, and keep stirring just to make sure that the sodium dihydroxide does fully dissolve, because sometimes it doesn't, and then you end up with sort of a hard raft of it at the bottom of your jug, which is no good. So here we go. You can see that some has stuck on the inside of the container. So we'll just sort of go in with our spatula. Looks like there was a little bit of moisture in this jar. Oops. Definitely something I should have checked for a little bit more carefully. All right. So this is quite hot. There's visible steam coming off of it, and I can definitely feel the warmth with my hand here. All right, we are ready to add our lye water. You can see that all the coconut oil has melted here, and this is not steaming quite as vigorously as it was before. So we'll start by giving this a bit of a stir with our spatula. You can immediately see that this is starting to become cloudy. To the touch, this pot is quite warm. We're already getting quite close to trace here. You can see that the mixture is reasonably uniform. You don't see any sort of big swirls of something that's definitely oil floating around anymore. And you can see it's becoming rather viscous already. So we'll grab our immersion blender or our stick blender now and give this a couple blasts. You can see that this is becoming more and more opaque. The immersion blender has a neat little poof you'll see come out when we turn it on. I would say we are at a fairly thin trace right now. So the term trace comes from you being able to sort of draw your blender across the top of it and actually see a trace of soap left behind. You can't see that here at this point in time, but I just kind of know from experience that at this point in time we are at a thin trace. If you're a new soap maker, I would definitely recommend that you go past this point. Right now, I would say we're at a fairly obvious but still pretty light trace. If I draw my spatula across the top, you can start to see little trains and details behind as I dribble it, but they're not hugely obvious. This is, say, sort of roughly the texture of maybe like a nice creamy soup. So now that we've reached trace, but it's not super thick, I'm gonna go grab all of the additives that we're going to need. These have already been pre-measured, I just need to go get them. You can see in just the few minutes that it took me to grab everything else, this has already started to thicken up quite a bit, and it will continue to thicken as we work with it. So we're going to add some clay, and this is just white kaolin clay. Kaolin? And this is some silk peptides. If you have silk powder or silk amino acids or even tussa silk, you can also use that. So we're gonna blend these in. You definitely wanna use the blending electric blender bitness of your immersion blender, otherwise you'll end up with clods of clay in your final bar of soap. Grab our spatula again and scrape down on the edges where some of the clay has collected. We'll set our immersion blender aside. I like to put it in the empty lye water jug. And now we're going to divide this batch of soap batter in half. Whenever I make soap, I generally like to make one batch of batter and then divide it into two halves so I can decorate each half differently. So in order to know how much to move into your second container, you'll need to add up the weights of everything. So that's all the oils, all the water and the lye, and then divide that by 2, and then you'll know how much to transfer over. Definitely don't do this by eyeballing it. You'll never be correct. And now we have 2 halves. One of the halves I'm going to do a swirly fancy bit with, and the other half I want to do in 2 layers. So I'm going to do the swirly portion of the recipe first, because as the soap sits, it will continue to set up. And a thicker soap is useful for, or thicker trace is useful for doing layers so that they can support the weight of the other layers, but a thinner one is what we're going to want for doing swirls. So I will set this pot here aside to make our layered soap with, and we'll dive into the swirly soap over here. So this is the second half of that first batch of batter, and this is the half that gets the attention second. And you can see that it has thickened up a lot in the time that we took to decorate that first batch. So the first thing we'll do here is we'll stir in our essential oil. So this is peppermint and menthol essential oil. And this will help loosen up this very thick batter, which is good. Now we're ready to divide this in half by weight. So 1/2 of this batter is going to be colored with this lovely, pretty mica that is called Teal, My Breaking Heart. All right, that one's done. And so this half is going to be our exfoliating half of these sort of scrubby menthol bars. So we've got 2 scrubby bits. We've got some fine pumice here. I'll start to fold that in so that the dust doesn't float up too much. And you can see that we've got some clods of the pumice in here. So we are going to get our immersion blender involved so that we don't have cloddy pumice bits in our final soap. You will want to use a paper towel to wipe the blue off of this, or give it a good wash depending on how particular you are about your soaps being aesthetically, yeah. There's enough soap here that I figured that amount of blue is gonna dilute pretty much completely in here and will be barely noticeable. All right. I don't see any more clumps of pumice, so we can scoop the excess soap batter out of here. And you can definitely see that there's really no noticeable turquoise tint to this, despite the fact that I did not bother to clean off the immersion blender, which is good. So we're going to move back to our larger spatula here, as it definitely has a bit more stirring power, and we're going to add our poppy seeds. So we're adding the poppy seeds after we use the immersion blender so that we don't, chop them up. So since this is going to be the bottom layer of our bar, we're going to just add this to our mold right now. And we're going to do the best job that we can of just smoothing this out so that it's level. It helps to sort of move that rubber band back a little bit, but you don't want to move it back too much, because if it comes off the parchment paper, then the parchment paper will start to flop into the soap and in your way, and that is no good. Okay, so that's about as even as it's gonna get. So I'm gonna pop this to the side. Get this in better view. And we wanna wipe down the inside of the molds here, where there's been a bit of sort of spread up, which you can see, with a paper towel. This is so we get nice, clean edges. And now we're going to do a seam with some indigo. So I've got a sieve here, a fine sieve, and I've got some indigo. So this is basically going to be like you are doing icing sugar on a cake. We want a very fine layer. If it gets too thick, it can mean that the two halves of the soap don't have a chance to bind with one another. All right, there we are. Next up, we need to do another quick wipe down of the sides here so that we don't end up getting any of the seam, which should be, very thin and localized in our blue bit. So I'm actually going to take some isopropyl alcohol here and get it on a piece of paper towel to help with the wiping process, since this pigment is quite strong and it is streaking. All right, I'm reasonably happy with that. And now we add our top layer here. We want to be reasonably gentle because we don't want to dent that seam. So I'm just sort of lightly dolloping bits of it over from not too far away. so there's not any acceleration really. Start to gently smooth them out. We're going to give this a couple wraps on the counter to knock out any air bubbles. Because this batter was quite thick, there's a pretty good chance that there are some air bubbles in there, so the wrapping is a good idea. It probably won't get rid of everything, but it'll sure help. And now we can do some little scoopy bits, if you are so inclined. All right, now we're just gonna pop our lid on here. Can sort of loop it underneath the elastics. And I'm not letting it sit all the way in, because if it does, it'll crush our pretty top designs. And now all that's left to do is wait. We're going to leave this mold for about 24 hours before slicing our soaps and leaving them to age. It's been about 28 hours, and so we are ready to cut our soap. Looking good. I've got a scrap tub over here for all my little soap trimmings. I'll save them up and make them into something in a little while when it's full. Looks pretty. As you cut, it can be useful to wipe off the blade of your knife with a damp cloth so that you don't have too much sort of soap streaking. Now that it's all cut, all that's left to do is leave your soap to age for at least 3 weeks, somewhere dry and not very busy so it won't be disturbed. And that's about it. You just made some beautiful, scrubby, minty soap. Thanks so much for watching. Please check the description box below for the full written recipe and everything I used in this video, and I will see you next time.